Something just happened that the entire Middle East did not see coming. A move so calculated, so precise, and so devastating that analysts in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing are scrambling to understand what it actually means. This was not a missile. This was not a military strike. This was something far more dangerous, and Iran's supreme leader knows it. Because what the UAE just did cannot be undone. It cannot be reversed. And Tehran has absolutely no answer for it. The question is, what exactly happened? And why is this moment being described behind closed doors as one of the most consequential shifts in Middle Eastern power in the last 2 decades? Stay with the story, because by the end, you will understand why the map of the Middle East is being redrawn. Not with bombs, but with something that cuts deeper. Let's set the scene. For decades, Iran has operated with a certain kind of confidence in the Middle East. It built a network, a web of influence that stretched from Tehran all the way to Beirut, Baghdad, Damascus, and Sana'a. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the PMF in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, Assad's military in Syria. This network was Iran's crown jewel. It gave the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, something no military alone could provide: strategic depth, the ability to project power without ever firing a single missile from Iranian soil, a ring of influence that surrounded Iran's rivals and kept American and Israeli power constantly off balance. For years, this system worked almost perfectly, but something has been quietly changing, and the UAE is at the center of it. To understand the full weight of what just happened, you need to understand one thing about the UAE that most people overlook. The UAE is not just a country of skyscrapers and luxury hotels. It is one of the most strategically positioned nations on the planet, sitting at the entrance to the Persian Gulf, controlling some of the world's most critical trade routes, and home to one of the most sophisticated financial and intelligence networks in the world. The UAE has spent the last 15 years quietly building a different kind of power. Not the power of armies, the power of influence. And in recent years, Abu Dhabi made a decision, a quiet, deliberate, and deeply strategic decision. It decided that Iran's network had to be dismantled, not through war, but through something smarter. The Abraham Accords were signed in 2020, and at the time, much of the world focused on the optics, peace between Israel and the UAE, handshakes, ceremonies, diplomatic language. But what was happening underneath the surface was something entirely different. Because the Abraham Accords were not just about peace with Israel, they were the beginning of a new architecture, a counter-network, a coalition designed to do one thing above all else: economically, diplomatically, and strategically isolate Iran. And here is where it gets fascinating. Because the UAE did not do this by making enemies. It did it by making deals. Over the last 4 years, the UAE quietly expanded its diplomatic and economic footprint across every region that Iran had historically dominated. In Iraq, Emirati investment began flowing in at a scale never seen before. Infrastructure projects, trade agreements, business partnerships with Iraqi tribal and political leaders who had spent years inside Iran's orbit. And slowly, those leaders began to reorient. Not because Abu Dhabi told them to, but because Abu Dhabi offered them something Tehran never could: real money, real development, real opportunity. In Syria, as the Assad regime collapsed and a new political reality began to take shape, it was Emirati diplomats who moved first, quietly re-establishing ties, positioning Abu Dhabi as the key Arab partner for Syria's reconstruction. Iran had spent billions keeping Assad in power, and now the country it bled for was turning toward the UAE. But this was only the beginning, because the single most powerful move the UAE made, the one that is sending shockwaves through Tehran right now, was not in Iraq or Syria. It happened in Yemen. For nearly a decade, Yemen has been the most brutal and complex conflict in the Middle East, and at the heart of it was a simple strategic reality. Iran used the Houthis to control the Red Sea, to threaten Saudi Arabia, to extend its reach all the way to the Gulf of Aden. Yemen was Iran's most powerful pressure point, a knife pointed at the throat of global shipping and Gulf security. But what happened next changed everything. The UAE, working through a combination of military, financial, and diplomatic channels, began building a parallel power structure in southern Yemen that Tehran simply cannot compete with. The Southern Transitional Council, local governance frameworks, port control in Aden, security arrangements in Socotra and along the Gulf of Aden coastline. Quietly, methodically, and without the drama of headlines, the UAE carved out a sphere of influence in Yemen that now serves as a direct counterweight to Houthi power in the north. And here's what makes this so dangerous for Iran. The Houthis are expensive to maintain. Iran pumps weapons, money, and advisors into northern Yemen constantly. It is a logistical nightmare, a financial drain, and the returns are diminishing. Meanwhile, the UAE's position in the south is growing stronger, more stable, and more connected to global trade and investment every single year. Iran is running a network built on conflict. The UAE is building one built on commerce, and commerce always wins in the long run. But even all of this, as significant as it is, does not explain the full picture. Because the move that is truly keeping Khamenei awake at night is not happening on any battlefield. It is happening in the financial system. Iran has lived under sanctions for decades, and in response, it built a shadow economy, a network of front companies, intermediary banks, cryptocurrency channels, and informal money transfer systems that allowed it to keep funding Hezbollah, the Houthis, and its other proxies even under maximum pressure. For years, this shadow network was virtually untouchable, until the UAE decided to change that. Here is something most people do not realize about Dubai. For years, Dubai was also known as one of the world's most permissive financial hubs, a place where money from almost anywhere could flow with minimal scrutiny. And that included Iranian money, businesses tied to the IRGC, front companies linked to Hezbollah's financial wing, real estate transactions that served as money laundering operations for Tehran's proxy funding. Dubai, paradoxically, was a lifeline for Iran, even as the two countries were geopolitical rivals. And then the UAE made a decision that no one expected. It began systematically dismantling that access. Starting in 2022 and accelerating sharply through 2024 and into 2025, the UAE implemented a sweeping overhaul of its financial oversight infrastructure. New anti-money laundering frameworks, new beneficial ownership registries, new cooperation agreements with the US Treasury, the European Union, and FATF, the global financial watchdog. Hundreds of companies linked to Iranian sanctions evasion were investigated. Bank accounts were frozen. Real estate transactions were unwound. The financial corridors that Tehran had used for years to keep its proxy network funded began closing one by one. And this is the part that makes this so irreversible. Iran cannot rebuild those channels in the UAE because the UAE is now under international scrutiny, because the regulatory architecture is now in place, because the political will in Abu Dhabi has shifted permanently. Tehran has lost its financial backdoor, and it can never get it back. This is where things take a serious turn, because losing financial channels is not just an inconvenience for Iran. It is an existential threat to its entire regional strategy. Think about what Hezbollah requires to function. Salaries for tens of thousands of fighters, weapons procurement, social services in Lebanon that give it political legitimacy, media operations, intelligence networks. All of that requires money, constant, reliable, untraceable money. And a significant portion of that money moved through the UAE. Now it cannot. The same applies to the Houthis, the same applies to Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, the same applies to weapons procurement networks that used Dubai's ports and free trade zones as transit points. The UAE did not fire a single bullet, but it cut the financial arteries of Iran's entire proxy empire. And now we have to talk about something that goes even deeper. Because beyond the financial dimension, the UAE has made a move that strikes at something Iran values more than money. It strikes at legitimacy. Here is what is happening across the Arab world right now. For decades, Iran positioned itself as the champion of the Palestinian cause, as the defender of Muslim dignity against Western imperialism and Israeli aggression. This narrative was the ideological fuel that powered its proxy network. It gave Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran's other partners a story to tell, a reason to fight beyond mere geopolitics. But the Abraham Accords and the UAE's open, visible, and prosperous relationship with Israel shattered that narrative for an entire generation of Arabs. Because here was one of the most respected, most modern, most successful Arab nations saying openly and proudly that cooperation with Israel was not a betrayal. It was a choice, a sovereign choice, and it was producing results. New technology partnerships, tourism, investment, trade, cultural exchange. And young people across the Arab world who had grown up hearing that resistance was the only path began to see a different possibility. Iran understood immediately what this meant, because the Abraham Accords were not just a diplomatic agreement, they were an ideological challenge. They said, in the clearest possible terms, that Iran's model, the model of resistance, sacrifice, and perpetual conflict, was not the only way. And the UAE's continued success, its continued growth, its continued global relevance, makes that challenge louder with every passing year. Every new skyscraper in Dubai is a rebuttal to Tehran's ideology. Every international company that sets up headquarters in Abu Dhabi is evidence that the Arab world does not need Iranian protection. Every tourist, every investment, every partnership is proof that a different future is possible. And Khamenei cannot counter that, because he cannot offer it. But what happened next changed everything. Because just as Iran was absorbing the full weight of these losses, the UAE made another move, one that was quiet, but devastating in its implications. It began deepening its intelligence and security cooperation with Israel at a level that has no precedent in the history of Arab-Israeli relations. Shared surveillance infrastructure, joint maritime monitoring in the Gulf, intelligence sharing on Iranian weapons, smuggling routes, coordinated monitoring of Hezbollah financial networks. For the first time in history, Israeli intelligence assets and Emirati intelligence assets are working from the same operational picture when it comes to Iranian threat assessment. Think about what that means for Iran's ability to operate covertly in the region. Every move Iran makes through its proxy networks is now being observed by two of the most sophisticated intelligence operations in the Middle East, working together, sharing data, comparing notes. The secrecy that Iran's entire strategy depended on is evaporating. And here is what makes this moment so significant for Khamenei personally. The supreme leader is old, he is in poor health, and he knows that the question of succession is now the most critical issue facing the Islamic Republic. When Khamenei eventually passes, Iran will face its most dangerous internal moment since the revolution of 1979. Because there is no obvious successor. There is no figure who commands the loyalty of the IRGC, the clerical establishment, and the Iranian people simultaneously. And the regional network, the axis of resistance, was supposed to be the insurance policy, the proof that Iran's revolutionary ideology was alive and expanding, the legacy that Khamenei could point to and say, "We built something that will outlast me." But that network is crumbling. Not because of American sanctions alone, not because of Israeli strikes, but because the UAE methodically removed its financial foundations, isolated it diplomatically, and offered the Arab world a competing vision. The legacy is under threat, and time is running out. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at the full picture. Because what we are witnessing is not just a story about the UAE and Iran. It is a story about two completely different visions of what power looks like in the 21st century. Iran's model is old. It is built on ideology, coercion, and military leverage. It requires constant conflict to survive, because conflict is what justifies its existence. The moment the region stabilizes, the moment Arab governments feel secure, the moment trade and development replace war. As the dominant logic, Iran's model becomes irrelevant. The UAE's model is new. It is built on connectivity, commerce, and competence. It does not need enemies to survive. It grows stronger the more the region stabilizes. Every peace deal, every trade agreement, every infrastructure project makes it more powerful. These two models cannot coexist indefinitely. And right now, one of them is winning. Let's talk about what Iran can actually do in response. Because Tehran is not passive. It is watching. It is calculating. And it still has tools. It can escalate through its proxies. The Houthis can continue attacking Red Sea shipping. Hezbollah can threaten Israel. Iraqi militias can target American forces. But here's the problem with all of those options. Every escalation makes Iran's proxies more expensive to maintain and more politically toxic to support. Every attack on commercial shipping turns more of the world against the Houthi cause. Every Hezbollah missile fired into Israel strengthens the case for dismantling its financial networks. Every militia attack in Iraq accelerates Baghdad's slow but visible drift away from Iranian influence. Iran's tools of escalation are simultaneously its tools of self-destruction. And there is one more dimension to this story that cannot be ignored. Saudi Arabia. For decades, Saudi Arabia and Iran were the defining rivalry of the Middle East, Sunni versus Shia, Arab nationalism versus Persian revolutionary ideology, the Gulf monarchies versus the resistance axis. And then, in a move that shocked the world, Saudi Arabia and Iran signed a normalization agreement in 2023, brokered by China. On the surface, this looked like a defeat for the UAE's strategy. Like the Gulf states were making peace with Tehran, but look deeper. Because the UAE quietly supported that normalization, not because it wanted peace with Iran, but because it understood something strategic. A Saudi Arabia that is not in active confrontation with Iran is a Saudi Arabia that can be more aggressive economically and diplomatically. A Saudi Arabia that is not worried about Houthi missiles can focus entirely on Vision 2030, on tourism, on investment, on the new Saudi model that, just like the UAE model, represents everything Iran's ideology fears. The normalization was not a defeat for the anti-Iran coalition. It was the coalition choosing to fight on a different battlefield. This is where things take their most serious turn yet. Because the battlefield that matters most right now is not in Yemen or Lebanon or Iraq. It is in Iran itself. The Iranian economy is in crisis. The rail has collapsed. Inflation has gutted the middle class. The youth population, the most educated and connected generation in Iranian history, is deeply disillusioned with the regime, the protests of 2019. The uprising of 2022, the quiet, constant, daily erosion of regime legitimacy that continues even when the cameras are not watching. Iran's leadership is not just fighting external pressure. It is fighting a slow internal collapse. And the UAE, by closing Iran's financial backdoors, has made that internal pressure worse. Because the money that used to flow through Dubai and keep the regime's patronage networks functioning That money is no longer available. The IRGC generals who controlled those financial flows are squeezed. The front companies that funded regime loyalty are being shut down. The informal economy that kept the system afloat is under unprecedented pressure. And here is the final piece of this picture, the piece that makes everything else make sense. The UAE is not doing this alone. What Abu Dhabi has built quietly, carefully, and with extraordinary patience is the foundation of a new regional order, one that links the Gulf states, Israel, Jordan, Egypt, and increasingly Iraq and parts of the Levant, into an economic and security architecture that has no place for Iran's current model. Not an anti-Iran alliance in the traditional military sense. Something more subtle and more durable than that. A web of interdependence that makes conflict costly and cooperation rewarding. A network of trade routes, investment flows, intelligence partnerships, and diplomatic relationships that collectively produce a region where Iran's tools of leverage simply stop working. Hezbollah cannot threaten a region that has moved past the logic of threat. The Houthis cannot hold hostage a trade network that has found alternative routes and built alternative coalitions. Iranian ideology cannot inspire resistance against prosperity. So what does this mean for Khamenei? It means the project he dedicated his life to, the project of spreading Iran's revolutionary model across the Arab world, is failing. Not dramatically, not all at once, but systematically, structurally, and in ways that cannot easily be reversed. The financial architecture is closing, the ideological appeal is fading, the proxy network is expensive and increasingly ineffective. The Arab world is choosing a different future, and time is working against Tehran, not for it. The UAE did not fire a missile. It did not send soldiers. It did not issue ultimatums. It simply built a better offer, and it made sure that offer was real. That is the hit that Khamenei can never recover from, because you can defend against bombs, you can survive sanctions, you can endure isolation, but you cannot compete with a vision that is actually working. The Middle East is changing, not with the thunder of war, but with the quiet, relentless logic of commerce, connectivity, and competent governance. The UAE understood that before anyone else, and it has been executing on that understanding for years. And now, as Iran's supreme leader looks at the map of the region he spent decades trying to reshape, he sees something he never expected to see, a world that is moving forward without him, a world that does not need his revolution, a world that has found a different way. And there is nothing he can do to bring it back.